Good morning. I'm Muriel Bowser. We are in the Deanwood Recreation Center in Ward 7 in Washington, D.C. I'm joined by members of my public safety team. We have just concluded a crime meeting with advisory neighborhood commissioners from all 8 wards with various backgrounds and experiences, and we heard from them about specific concerns in their ANC areas, policy concerns about crime, how to address youth, and how the government is supporting them. We also got some very good feedback about better communicating with them and understanding the programs in DC government. So with that, we will take a few questions. Yes, Tom.
Mayor, what did you learn?
Well, I learned a lot, as I always do in talking to the ANCs. I think one of the key pieces of feedback that I got was they appreciate having a citywide meeting that is focused on some big level issues, understanding the context on an issue, in this case crime, and what's available. And I will go back and look at some of the feedback questions that we posed as well. I don't have all the answers off the top. And some of the specific even takeaways from each table I thought weren't unexpected. One thing that comes up and that we expected to hear was around programming, that people will say there's nothing for young people to do. And I think that we're all challenged because we know there's a lot for young people to do. We're at the Deanwood Recreation Center where a lot is happening. But it's not engaging every person or every young person in particular that we need to touch.
You said at the beginning that I think you said that the anxiety, regardless of the statistics that the chief can recite, that the anxiety over crime is as bad or equal to the crack cocaine epidemic. But you also urged these ANC members to be more active with the council and public hearings and to be more involved. Is that one of your concerns, that the ANC commissioners that you hear around the community aren't more active at the Wilson building?
Well, I think ANCs, there are over, how many ANCs do we have? I think almost 300. There are over 300 people. They represent a micro area, 2,000 people. And their approach to the job is very different sometimes from person to person. And so some ANCs will focus just on the environmental issues in their SMD or the capital project in their SMD, and that's their focus, and that's fine. Others will take a broad policy approach to the job and advise on budget and policy, and that too is fine. But I think that we want to let them know that there are all kinds of ways that they can do their job. And if they want to impact staffing for policing, for example, the time to do it is with the budget. And it is at hearings, and it's not after legislative action has happened, but during the process. Yes.
The point was made by one of the ANCs, and I think you'd agreed that, and you talked about it, that the programming doesn't engage the people that it probably needs to. There's a certain.
Nope, that's not what I said.
Well, okay. Well, I'm putting this question forward. Are you reaching the people that need to be reached when you have a community center like this? Because a lot of kids won't come here, or either they'll come to a community center and the group that they're beefing with is there too, and they can be point of contention. How do you reach everybody, the kids that don't show up and don't want to be part of what goes on at the
right
center?
So I agree with the last thing that you asked. How do we reach everybody? Because the truth is these centers are touching a lot of kids, and we can't forget about them. The kids that are already in the swim class, that are doing basketball, that go to this daycare center, they're engaging a lot of people. So the question is, how do we engage young people who won't step foot in here, who may already be justice involved, who may already be carrying guns, and what is the programming that impacts them? And so what we talked about was our alternatives to policing a lot, our violence interruption, our programs, like we didn't talk about it much here, but we have a program called Pathways that is focused on disconnected people, not just juveniles, but disconnected people, and how to get them in the programming that they need. Yes.
Mayor, we heard Chief Conti talk about how police staffing levels are at historic lows right now. We also heard that about $115 million are going to be spent this year on violence interrupter and violence prevention programs. Do you think the balance between police funding and violence prevention and interrupter programs is at the right level, or do you think one should be more and one should be less?
I think that it's not a either or. I think that we will fund the programs that work at the levels that I think we need. And we need more police. You've heard me say that. And we are going to go into this budget cycle with the appropriate request based on what the chief recommends to us and what we think that we can hire safely and get on the street. Our discussion about violence interruption is a separate one. I think we are very focused on these relatively new programs. I think we started in 2018 in earnest, and it's now 2023. So 5 years in. We have them in 2 places in the executive branch right now under the direction of the mayor and the attorney general. So that continues to be a discussion that we have. And quite frankly, being able to measure success, which is somewhat elusive in these programs, but we're committed to that discussion so that when I come out, you heard somebody say in the audience that there's a lot of criticism of violence interruption programs, and I think there's a lot of support for them too. But I think what people want to know is that if you're spending $115 million, is it working? Some other people want to say that $115 million should be for the police, but it's not. We don't approach it as an either or investment. Yes.
Rarely hear a city leader talk in such grim terms about crime in her city. I mean, you recollected back to the 80s and 90s in terms of anxiety and fear. Is this a reflection of reality as you see it, or is this a part of a push to engage ANC members in your upcoming fights against the council and some of their programs?
What you heard us was talk about, that's why we had a state of crime to talk about the facts. And I'm reflecting what I hear in neighborhoods across the District of Columbia, that people want to make sure that we are addressing crime and that we are preventing crime. So that's what we talked about.
Is this part of a political push to engage ANCs?
It's part of our day-to-day job to engage ANCs. We engage ANCs all the time. Yes.
Mayor, have you ever convened or invited all ANCs to convene like this before? Is this something you've done before?
I'm sure it is.
Okay. Well, one thing that stood out, and actually what you just said about the violence interrupters, we have a new attorney general. Have you talked to him about potentially merging those programs?
Yes.
Okay, and what's his feeling about that?
We haven't, I don't know that I've landed on a feeling about that. But I do recognize that there's likely some more coordination that we could do. For example, we saw, and I asked Lindsay, when we showed the slides about violence interruption, the cure violence wasn't on our slide. And that's not completely accurate portrayal of it, but we may not know all of the people who are, all of the violence interrupters who are working in that program. That's just like a logistics kind of thing that if they're in the same office, that wouldn't be a question. But that's neither kind of here nor there in a broader discussion about how it should be implemented.
And then sticking with the programming, is there a disconnect, or does there need to be better communication to the ANCs or to the communities about rec centers and what's open, what's closed? It seemed like there was confusion about that.
I think that the people who use rec centers know exactly what's open and what's closed. What I heard and what Delano talked about was getting back to pre-pandemic levels of hours. And in some cases, in some rec centers, they're not at pre-pandemic hours. And we're all focused on that. So I think that's what we can communicate to them, as I mentioned. Yep. Yes.
Hi there, Mayor Aisha Khan from Box 5. You talked about working with the police department. You need to hire more police officers. I know this has been heard before. What are you doing differently this time around to not only hire, but to retain them, give them that extra training? Are we going to be able to, maybe listen to the request of some of these ANC commissioners and their neighbors who are saying, let's put these officers who are undercover, who are in plain clothing, or maybe even at the exit ramps, so they can communicate with one another? How realistic is that, and what are you doing differently this time around to not only hire but to retain?
Let me let me ask the chief to talk to you about hiring.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So with respect to hiring, on the back end of last year, several things have been done. The first thing, one of the important things was the mayor initially made the $20,000 signing bonus as an investment into the police department. That was approved by council, which is a great thing with respect to attracting people. And in addition to that, we also offer housing allowance for officers to get them living here in the district. Another thing that the mayor has done in terms of building the pipeline is to expand our police cadet program, which is actually operating very well right now. We're over 100 police cadets. These are D.C. residents, primarily from Ward 7 and Ward 8, who will be police officers on the streets of the District of Columbia. In addition to all of that, the city reached an agreement with the police union in terms of having a pay raise, which they have not had one in the last couple of years. But to reach that, I think is it's very important in the space of retention, trying to keep the great officers that we have within the agency. So I don't think there's any one particular thing. It's really all of those things working together to hire and retain in a space where everybody is struggling to hire police officers. Some people just don't want to work right now, but specifically in this space, we're focusing on hiring and keeping our police officers. With respect to the, shutting off the exits for people who are when crimes are committed, that gets more into strategy, and we have strategies that we utilize, and I won't talk about all of those strategies, but I would say that that probably is an unrealistic expectation that every time there's a shooting, that every exit to the District of Columbia is covered by a police officer and you're going to stop every car that's coming through.
What is the vacancy rate now?
Right now, we're at 3,384 officers, Tom, and that is significantly low for us. We'd like to be at 4,000. We're not there. When I took over, we were at 3,800 police officers. So you kind of do the math on that. We are really at a deficit. Yeah.
Mayor, I actually have a question for you. I want to ask you the same question you asked the ANC commissioners. Have you or someone you know personally been a victim of the following types of crime? Homicide, killed, gun violence, other violent crime, or none? Do you know someone personally?
Yes, I know people personally. I will share with you. I was an ANC commissioner in 4B09 in a neighborhood called Riggs Park. And one of the things we were very proud of was building a recreation center in Riggs Park. One of my neighbors and friends works in that recreation center, and a couple of weeks ago, somebody walked up to the doors of the recreation center and shot into it while our employees were there. Okay? And so that was very recent.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Mayor. You said people are hearing gunshots more and more. The chief talked about the pop, pop, pop going to the automatic sound of automatic weapons fire. What can you do about guns? You talked about the states they're coming from. Are your hands tied on this? Can you do anything against guns?
Well, if you're talking about more largely about guns coming in, that's a national discussion about what we're going to do as a country where we have more guns in the U.S. than we have people. We now have more concealed carry permits than I thought we would, legal guns in the district. And we are arresting people and confiscating guns. So the police are working very hard to take guns off of the streets. It is important, however, and that's why you hear me say time and time again, to stop gun crime at possession before one of those guns is used in a shooting or homicide. Chief, do you want anything about guns?
The other thing that I would add, we're doing everything we possibly can to include working very, very closely with the ATF. In fact, the Executive Assistant Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department is the former head of the Washington Field Office of ATF, so we have a very strong relationship with them. They are really part of the fabric of the Metropolitan Police Department with respect to our investigations into homicides, as well as some of our violent crimes when it comes to shootings. Our NIBIN Investigations Unit, they have worked very closely with MPD detectives to look at the science, look at this handgun that's connected to this shooting, and this shooting, and figuring out who's the person, the common denominator in all of that, and pushing those cases forward. They've put over 60 cases before the federal court, supported by the U.S. Attorney's Office, for people who have been involved in multiple gun offenses in our city. So I think leveraging or really kind of highlighting the partnerships that we have with our federal partners have been very helpful in this fight. One of the things that's different, and I didn't talk about this, I was looking at some recent information. Historically, let's go back, last 5-6 years, you look at the time of the time that a handgun may have been purchased, be it a straw purchase or whatever, until the time that handgun would show up in a crime, it could be 8 years, 10 years, somewhere around there. Just recently, I was looking at numbers for last year. We saw firearms that were purchased, in some cases straw purchases. That gives us a trail to follow up on. But from the time that they were purchased to the time they showed up on a crime scene was less than a year. And that is a significant change in what we've seen in historical numbers. So the influx of firearms that are in our city, that are in cars, that are coming through our city, as the mayor mentioned, people who are carrying legal firearms, over 12,000 concealed carry permits in our city. I mean, that is a lot of firearms, and I can't stress that enough. We look at our victims of homicides and our victims of shootings. A lot of times, in cases, our victims are oftentimes armed with firearms. And it's really an honest assessment of the state of where we are right now.
Okay, I'll take a couple more.
And this is for the chief. In talking about the youth and the gun violence, which was talked about a lot today, one of the ANCs says, she wished the room had been full of young people. Is that a solution that you think is viable and one that you all are considering as you look for solutions to this problem?
Talking and getting feedback directly from young people, yes, is certainly, we want to have a variety of forums to do that. It was suggested, I guess, in one of the questions earlier that we only are having a meeting about crime for some political purpose, which, that's kind of crazy in my view to suggest when we're getting the types of calls that we're getting. We in fact wouldn't have had any cameras in the room because that's how important I think it was to have a candid conversation with people so that they could feel in a safe place to say what's on their mind, what they're thinking, and what the government should be doing. Last week we met with 2 weeks ago, concerned group of principals for high schools and secondary schools where the conversation was very candid. It came up in that meeting as well. Talk to the young people, ask the young people. So we want to put people, our young people, in a space to hear directly from them. But we also know we have a responsibility to work with all the experts and professionals, the ANC commissioners, the council members, to make sure that we're engaging people and dealing with them where they are. Yeah. Yes, Tom.
My last question, Mayor. You talked about youth crime and youth being victims of crime. Is there anything the chief or you could tell us about Karan Blake and the investigation into that shooting?
Chief, do you have anything?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for the question. I know that obviously this is of great interest to the community, as it is for our government, our police department, the family. What I will say is that we are making progress and getting closer to having a better understanding of what happened. I want to thank community members who have come forward with video. That has been very helpful in this case. So again, as I have asked before, for the community's patience as we work through this process, it is a process, but that process is progressing.
Okay, last question.
One of the big concerns we heard throughout the morning was about juvenile offenses. In particular, almost 400 juveniles were arrested for violent crime in 2022. A third of them, that was their first entrance into the criminal justice system. What is driving that? What can be done to stop it?
Well, one thing that I wanted to highlight and just in pictures is the last several years, what I call the kind of disruption of our criminal justice system, our public safety system, but also our safety net. And so I don't think we can point to a single thing that has that's impacting kind of youth violence. But I would say that just the isolation and disconnection and disruption of COVID has separated a lot of young kids from systems that have kept them safe. And so that's why we're very, very focused on making sure our government is open, all of our partner organizations are open and in person, and working with young people. So, thank you for being here. And as a person who was an ANC commissioner, I always appreciate when our commissioners who are volunteers take time out of their lives to get information so that they can disseminate that information to their constituents. Thank you very much.